So as Taylor pointed out here, you've got these two polar opposite individuals in these two chapters back to back, and it's one flowing story from John's account in his gospel. So I'll just get this started, and then let's talk through this. Mm-hmm. You have Nicodemus, who is a man. The woman at the well being a woman. He's a Jew. She is a Samaritan. They don't like each other. They're opposites.
What time of day is it?
He comes to Jesus at night. So Nicodemus is the one who comes. Jesus, on his way home from the Passover celebration down in Jerusalem, he's headed back home to the Galilee. And on the way, instead of taking the Jordan River route, so here's Jerusalem, here's Nazareth and Capernaum, he's headed home to Capernaum. Instead of taking the longer, more difficult Jordan River Valley route, he takes the shorter, direct route through Samaria that's going to cut multiple days off of your trip, and in the process stops here at Sychar, at this well, Jacob's well. So he does most of the journeying and comes to this woman in the middle of the day, and we'll talk more about that.
So this is important. Nicodemus comes to Jesus, and Jesus finds the woman at the well. Nicodemus finds Jesus, Jesus finds the woman.
So we could do the arrow the other way. Jesus goes to her. Nicodemus happens to be a Pharisee. And if you were to do a public opinion poll in the first century among these people about his righteousness, he would rate likely very high because he's zealous for keeping the law. And that's just how people see it, as a very righteous individual. And how would the people in Sychar look at the woman that meets him at the well?
That she's kind of a religious outcast. She's a sinner. So not somebody that people would want to be hanging around.
So you can keep this list going and going and going. There are all kinds of contrasts.
Throw out a few more?
Sure.
You should look at who's asking and answering questions. Right? Nicodemus is asking most of the questions. Here it's Jesus with the woman answering. You might ask, in which episode, who seems to figure out who Jesus is and who seems to stay confused about who Jesus is? And it's fascinating. If you really just map this out and create like a spreadsheet and do this with a few of your friends or loved ones, you'll probably find 20 or 30 really incredible parallels that are packed in. And by the way, we'll say this again, from a teaching and learning standpoint, comparison and contrast are a powerful way to teach. And John just does it naturally and doesn't even tell us. And it would have been helpful for some of us who maybe, I know somebody had to point this out to me at one point. I'm like, what? Now that I see it, it's so obvious. I wish John would have said, hey, reader, I want you to compare and contrast the next two stories. And I just wasn't smart enough to figure it out.
Yeah, so the final thing that I would like to kind of put on our list here is, and Taylor kind of touched on this already, it's the amount of time that it takes to be convinced that Jesus is the Christ. Nicodemus is going to drop out of our story largely until the very end of Jesus' life, 3 years later. In John's gospel, John's the one who introduced you to Nicodemus. He's going to complete the story of Nicodemus, where this individual, this Pharisee, this man who's zealous for keeping the law, is going to be present at the crucifixion of Jesus after he dies, and he is the one who helps Joseph of Arimathea take the body of Jesus off the cross, quickly wrap it, and put it in Joseph of Arimathea's tomb for burial. Touching a dead body makes one ritually impure. And in John's account, that's the evening when you're going to now be partaking of the Passover meal. It tells us that potentially Nicodemus has been working on this conversion process for 3 years, but he seems to have arrived after 3 years. I love this story. The woman at the well seems to take her, once they get going in their conversation, about 3 minutes. Now that's an exaggeration, just to try to keep it 3 and 3. It's probably a little bit longer than that. But the point is, she's very responsive to what Jesus has taught, and he's more pensitive. He wants to think about this and stew over it. Now, with that foundation, you could then say, on a scale from this bookend over to this bookend, on a scale from Nicodemus to the woman at the well, every one of us falls somewhere on that scale. And I think John's message to the world is that Jesus is the Christ. He's your Savior. He's your Redeemer. And it doesn't matter where you are on this scale. To me, that's one of the 30,000-foot overviews of these two chapters as we look at them in comparison and contrast at a high level.